YouTube.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Dr. Jenna Masson, interim principal of Nathan Hale Middle School. This fall, Superintendent Estrella asked schools to develop an equity committee and plan to unpack belief systems that impact students and our school climate. One of our initiatives here at Nathan Hale included providing a group of our students the opportunity to discuss inclusivity and ways to positively impact their sphere of influence. But they wanted to know more. They wanted to know how community leaders in Norwalk positively impact their community. Tonight's community panel discussion is a culmination of their efforts. We are proud to present Nathan Hale's community panel on inclusivity. I would like to now introduce their teacher, Mr. Brian Kirby.
Thank you, Dr. Masson. Good evening, everyone. In their final months of 8th grade, one of my classes was inspired to look deeper into how to have productive dialogues. They spent weeks reading and discussing, usually coming up with more questions than answers. This panel is made up of their efforts. Before I ask our moderators to introduce themselves, I want to acknowledge and thank our Justice House 8th graders for their hard work this year. If you're watching, and even if you're not, thank you very much. And now, if our moderators would introduce themselves. Sarah?
My name is Sarah. I'm in 8th grade. I go to Nathan Hale and I'm in Justice House, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hi, I'm Melanie Tanner. I am in 7th grade Revolution House, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hello, my name is Roy Rock. I am in 7th grade Liberty House, and my pronouns are he, him.
Thank you to all our panelists for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. In GT and at Nathan Hale as a whole, we've been working on having tough dialogues with students and staff. I have been facilitating a student group where we meet and talk about injustices in our community and the world, while also learning and understanding the social justice concept underlying these injustices. In addition, as Mr. Kirby said, Sarah and her 8th grade class have been researching how to have tough dialogues and creating resources to share with people. With the help of her classmates, we have some questions for you all. But first, can you briefly introduce yourself and briefly describe?
Melanie, do you want to re-ask that second question? I think you cut out a little bit.
Right. Can you briefly introduce yourself and briefly describe your role in Norwalk, please? Thank you.
I'm having difficulty hearing the question. There's a little echo.
Can you introduce yourself and your role?
Oh, okay. Introduce myself. I'm Mayor Harry Rilling. I'm the mayor of the city of Norwalk, and I have been the mayor since 2013. And thank you for inviting me to participate.
Good evening. I'm Superintendent Alexandra Estrella. I'm really delighted to be here this evening.
Hi, I'm Dr. Eddie Fergus. I am professor at Temple University. I am a partner with the school district in supporting Dr. Estrella's work around defining what does equity look like in Norwalk. I am super excited to listen to the students talk tonight. I know we're supposed to talk, but I'm excited, sorry.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Karen Amaker, and I am the principal of P-Tech Norwalk, Norwalk's 4th high school, and I'm really excited to be here, so thank you for the opportunity. Mrs. Rilling, we can't hear. Jeff, if you're listening, I believe everyone's muted.
But I think we were able to unmute. Can you hear me, Karen? Oh.
Hello, everyone. I've been invited to start. I hope you can hear me. My name is Rabbi Cantor, Shira Sklar. I am the senior rabbi of Temple Shalom in Norwalk. I also grew up in Norwalk. Temple Shalom. I've been serving Temple Shalom since 2005. And in the community, Temple Shalom is the largest Jewish synagogue in Norwalk. Thank you for having me.
Why don't we start with our first question from our students?
With the increasing amount of polarity in this country and the increasing need for anti-racism, what do you think is the best way to approach talking about racism and discrimination?
Are you going to, do you want anybody to answer that?
Yes, please, anyone can answer.
I'll just quickly say, it's very difficult to talk about some subjects, and this is one of them. But it takes courage. It takes open, honest discussion, because that is how we are starting to make a little bit of progress right now. The Black Lives Matter movement has helped us all understand that we can't ignore it. We have to talk about it. And you've got people in your lives that you can look up to, your parents, your teachers, your clergy, anybody that you can feel comfortable with. You should be able to talk about it and ask questions, but we should all be talking about it and all identifying where it exists and how we have to control it, or not control it, but eradicate it.
Thank you. Or does anyone else have an answer?
Sure, I can share. I love the question that you're posing, because as far as, for your generation to be able to be inquisitive about this is important, because part of what, and I think what Mayor is highlighting, is the difficulty around of this conversation, and that has created the polarity, is that we don't practice enough talking about it and creating a level of comfort where folks can actually understand their own development and evolution around the topic, right? And it's kind of like if it's something that you don't use, and you don't practice it, when you start using it, it's going to feel very foreign, and you're going to stumble across yourself, and sometimes we may stumble in a way that we choose not to do it again, right? But the reality is, around this particular topic, right, not just racism, but just all sorts of isms, is that we've got to be brave, right? To want to continue the endeavor, even when it gets difficult, it feels uncomfortable. The uncomfortability particularly is one of those pieces that we've got to be okay that we're going to push through that uncomfortability, because on the other side of it is really providing us an opportunity to be a more sort of understanding and evolved sort of individual that can really make sense of the world. So, and I also, the other thing I'll say is that we've always had, this has always been a conversation point. It's just been it's been different generations that's had a bit of an ebb and flow as to when it's risen to the top and when it's died down. And I think we're in a moment where it's risen up again, right? And I think, particularly given the information that I think we're able to use to help us isolate with the greater clarity as to how these isms kind of manifest for everyone's lives.
I think I will add to, in terms of what Eddie's said about comfortability. The way you become comfortable, like Eddie articulated, is by engaging and having the conversations. But also it takes people being brave to identify and support people through their blind spots. Because a lot of times you immerse yourself in dialogue and conversation, or you try to better understand a culture or a group of people, But if you have not been exposed or had the opportunity to engage, a lot of times you don't well understand the reasoning behind certain aspects of individual cultures and beliefs, and develop preconceived biases that then influence the way you think about and engage others. So one, being able to immerse yourself with a diverse group of people and having the openness to understand where they're coming from, the gifts that they bring to the table, and having a asset oriented mentality instead of a deficit mentality really will help us as a community, as a school system, to really highlight those blind spots that might be creating some of the systemic challenges that maybe we are seeing in Norwalk and the country is seeing at large, and will help us better work together as people to use each other's strengths as assets and not focus on things that people perceive as deficits because they have blind spots around the reality, each individual's reality.
I think a critical piece that we have been missing as a society and has seemed to be suffering in the recent years is our ability to not only have the discussions, but really to listen to what people are saying, to sit back and to not make preconceived judgments before we can fully know and understand the experience of the other, to treat everybody, from my perspective as a religious leader, I look at it in the vein of treating everyone as coming from the same divine source, having the source of godliness within, that we are each a part of the human family, and we need to have our hearts open enough to listen to each other's experiences and to validate each other's experiences.
I agree with everything everyone has said thus far, but I also think part of the conversation has to take place in the right spaces, right? So we have to give license for people to come together and have the conversations. And so schools are great breeding grounds for these kinds of dialogues and those courageous conversations that must take place. And so the fact that you young people in middle school are courageous enough to have this dialogue within your own school community, but then we're also being allowed to and supported in having these conversations throughout the district because of the leadership with Dr. Estrella and Dr. Fergus, that creates the opportunity and the access to say, it's okay to have the conversation. It's okay to disagree on certain things. It's not okay not to have the conversation, and it's okay to learn. That's what we're supposed to be doing as educators, right? Creating these opportunities, learning opportunities for ourselves as well as for our students. So this is a great example of what can happen when we're creative, when we're courageous, and we create the space to have the dialogue.
Thank you all for your answers. I'm going to move on to the next question now. We feel that it is important that our community should be welcoming for everyone. So what can we do as a community to prevent discrimination? And anyone can answer, of course.
Well, that's a big one, right? Because I think that's, in some ways, it's the ongoing endeavor of our society, particularly US society, that's had a very specific history, in how discrimination has been at various moments baked into how policies operate, right? So who gets to live where, who gets to have which types of jobs, who gets to be part of a hiring process, or who gets to go to which types of schools, right? Thinking about the Norwalk community, that the ways in which, how schools may have been organized in years past and who went to which schools, so it's, trying to sort of find a way to laser in to prevent that sort of habit of discrimination involves part of what we were just discussing in terms of creating a comfortability around the dialogue that we want to have, but also having, knowing that there's dialogue that needs to happen. There also tools that we can use when dialogue isn't enough. There's an important sort of role that legislation and policymakers and lawyers play, in ensuring that when discrimination does happen, that we rectify it, and that it is demanded that it be rectified. But it's a big, tall order, and the fact that you all are, in some ways, what I hear you all doing is like you're normalizing that part of your analytical skill development is this inquiry. And I love that that's part of your normal, because you can carry that through to your as you move on into high school.
Good.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm back.
We had to make an adjustment.
You didn't get rid of me that easy. I know you're trying, but it's not going to work. Anyway, your first question, if you wouldn't mind repeating that. I know I had a lot of comments in my mind, but if you wouldn't mind repeating the question, please.
Of course. With the increasing amount of polarity in this country and the increasing need for anti-racism, what do you think is the best way to approach talking about racism and discrimination?
Okay. Yeah. I think first and foremost, you have to be open-minded. You must open your mind up. You must open your senses up. You must realize that people have come to this country and from this country to others for centuries. And we need to understand that we're not all accustomed to our ways. And I believe that it's also important to spend time and observe. And as I said, open-mindedness, observation, being mindful that you too may seem to others as quite different. Because you live in your skin doesn't mean that everyone else sees the same way that you do. So perspective, open-mindedness, consideration, and much like Dr. Estrella had said, keep a positive, more or less, positive mindset. Don't form the opinions beforehand. Just like when you look at a book, don't judge the book by the cover, because the stories that are within could many times just be more amazing than you could ever imagine. So keep your mind open.
Thank you.
To answer the second question quickly, Norwalk is very, very blessed. We're a very diverse city. And you make your community welcoming by working hard to look where there might be issues, problems, having people feel comfortable talking about it, and finding out how they can reach out to someone if there is a problem. But to make a community welcoming, everybody has to participate. Everybody has to work towards it. And you have to make sure that, again, you identify where the problems exist and work very, very hard to eradicate those problems, to make people feel comfortable, to, we're running into a lot of problems right now all over the country. Whether it's the Black Lives Matter issue, people are attacking Asian Americans, Latinos are being discriminated against. So you have to make your community welcoming by opening up your doors and making all the opportunities within the community equally available to everybody else.
Thank you for your answer. Sarah, what did you take it from here?
Okay. Some students in our schools have experienced discrimination from others. How are you working to help prevent racism and other issues in schools? Also, this is directed to school administrators.
Okay, that's a great question. One, I think the work that we're doing with Dr. Fergus this year has created opportunities for the adults in the community to really look at those blind spots that Dr. Estrella talked about. We don't know what we don't know, right? Until we have an opportunity to really reflect. And that reflection is critically important for adults who assume that certain things are just the way they are because the way they've always been. And that's not always true. So I think for me, it's about making sure that one, I am committed to having a staff that reflects the student population in my school, right? And so I'm just looking at my notes here because I just put together a presentation for a job fair that I'm hosting tomorrow. And so my student population is 44% female and 56% male. My teaching staff and support staff population is 77% female and 23% male. So we see there's some discrepancies there as well, but overall it's pretty similar in terms of percentages. We're 40% faculty of color, and that's critically important because we know the diversity that exists within Norwalk. So for me to have a staff that is not reflective of my student population says that I'm not putting enough emphasis in the right places. The other thing that I think is critically important as a school leader is that the curriculum has to reflect the diversity that is available to all of us. We have to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table, that everyone's voice is heard, that there are reflections of the diverse populations in our school building. And this goes to everything, not just race and gender, but ableism, sexism, and all those other things that our students may be confronted with. So it's critically important that the books we read are not just of one type or representative of one individual or one race or class or such. We have to make sure that we're putting in diversity initiatives. So before we started with Dr. Fergus, my teachers in the first month of school actually went through an anti-bias, anti-racism training. And we're following that up this year with a second piece of that. And we have these open conversations. We talk about our values, and we know that what I value may be different than what someone else values. But having the conversations, looking at the curricula, looking at each other and being reflective and forcing each other to have those really difficult conversations where sometimes racism or bias or those blind spots may creep in, and then they impact the decisions that we make, which are not in the best interest of students. So it's a constant process of reflection, a constant process of doing better things and not just doing things better, and making sure that this is a priority for our school community because our students will be better for it, as well as the adults.
So all of the above that Karen articulated, I think as a superintendent, for me, it's really important, one, to support the principals in your schools to obtain or gain awareness of how systemic racism plays a negative role in how students form and develop in our system, and help them see how decisions that we make could potentially have an adverse impact in different within different groups of students in our organization. So as a superintendent, I try to look at and be able to identify and deconstruct areas in our school culture, our curriculum, and our programming and our communication that have contributed to systemic racism within the organization. And once those areas are identified, then working with our principals, assistant principals, and other staff to identify the root cause of where that's coming from. Dr. Fergus taught us that term. And then through that root cause analysis, then find ways in which we can dismantle some of the systemic structures that might be leading to unwanted outcomes. And it's a process, right? Because Principal I keep calling you Karen, Principal Amaker articulated, it starts with first getting to know self, right? So part of what we're doing with the principals is getting to know what are their internal biases, what are the things they need to know and learn about themselves so that they can then effectively support the system. And then thinking about what is happening in my school building that might be contributing to some of the challenges, and what are the things that we need to change, like that Principal America articulated, thinking about personnel. Do we have personnel that look like the students that we're serving? Is it do we have an equitable distribution of that? And if not, what are the things that we're doing as a school system to make sure that there's representation across the system of people that look like the children that we're serving? Because a lot of the research shows that that has a really strong positive correlation in terms of how students do, being able to see themselves in the people that are leading and supporting them through their development. So my focus as a superintendent has been, one, to build awareness, not only for the people that are serving you as students, but also listening to students. I actually meet with a group of students to hear from them how the system is impacting their well-being and their development. And through their experiences, then I am able to then further work with experts like Dr. Fergus and our principals to find ways in which we can continue to refine structures and systems that will better support you, but also eradicate systemic racism.
Thank you for all of your input and answering my question. Melanie, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. Are principals, teachers, and staff trained in anti-racism? If not, is there anything being done to change that?
So this year, our principals immerse themselves in a lot of anti-racism training, looking at systemic racism, looking at how a disproportionality, which is looking at how different groups are being impacted by the organization. And if there are certain groups that are not being served well, why not? And why are other groups maybe faring better than others? And what are the things that we as an organization can do better? So for us right now, Melanie, our first step is to look at what are we doing to build the principal's capacity so that then they can help build the teacher's capacity. So depending on the school and where people are, there's already been an initiation of teachers getting involved. Like your principal, like Dr. Masson said, she has an equity team in her building that has started to lead some of those conversations. And our goal is that next year, not only will we continue to train our principals, but we will also expand the training to our teachers as well. And I would love to have a group of middle school students, and maybe you guys will be my leaders in this, where I can talk to you and you can give us advice in terms of what your experiences have been and what are the things that we can do to help you have the best possible learning experience, regardless of who you are, where you come from, what your preferences are, because our jobs is to make sure that you get the best education and that you become your best self. So there is still a lot of work to do, but we are moving along.
All right, thank you. Dr. Fergus would like to add on?
Dr. Estrella says it all. It is a part of what we have to understand. And thinking about your first question, as you all launched into this, is recognizing that the capacity to be ready for and do continuous anti-racism work takes time, right? And that's the one thing that I think we have to give ourselves in terms of doing this, especially in the school environment, right? It's definitely it's not going to be a one-off types of trainings, but it's ongoing work. And I think, as Principal Amaker was describing, and I think Principal Masson is doing at your school, is the slow strategy to go fast in terms of moving this along and being strategic around where they're trying to do this work, right? Like, it's the, where do we see opportunities where we need to create better access for our kids in our system, and starting in those doable areas, and then start to grow how much bigger we can actually be in impacting the roots of these forms of racism and other forms of discrimination that exist within our system. But I think there is, but to your question, it is, yes, it's definitely is work that is going on, and it's got to keep going.
I'd like to also add, as a religious leader in the community, I often get approached from families who have undergone some kind of discrimination. It often comes to the point where they come to me first, or our synagogue, first leaders of our synagogue. And it's been very, very gratifying and productive for us to work as a team in the community. Several years ago, as part of a larger consortium of congregations that we are active with of all denominations, the organization called Connect, Congregations Organized for a New Connecticut, came together and did an anti-bias training for the professional teaching staff in the city of Norwalk. This was in 2018, where representatives from members of minority groups trained teachers and educators and paraprofessionals on the unique communities of which this city serves. And it's been very wonderful to be a part of that. But I also think that the mindset needs to change to be proactive rather than reactive. We shouldn't wait to have some kind of response or coordination until after there is an incident that ends up in the papers. It should be ongoing, and it should be well thought out and deliberate.
Thank you for your answers. Sarah, would you like to ask a question?
When acts of discrimination happen, whether they be race-based, anti-Semitic, or anti-LGBTQ+, to name a few, we know that students need to feel safe to share their emotions and cope with these acts. Are there any safe places or resources in the community where students who have faced discrimination can talk to receive help? Rabbi Sklar, you touched on this earlier. Would you like to start?
Sure. I think it's, first of all, it's very important that the schools and the community institutions be on the same page of this, that there should be no tolerance for discrimination of any kind, no excuses made for discrimination of any kind. And I think the more, it's a difficult conundrum for the Jewish community, because I think that we go through cycles and periods of time where this is more acceptable behavior, or has been perceived as more acceptable behavior to be outwardly anti-Semitic. And then I was very fortunate when I was growing up, this was very, very unheard of. And now we see the trend, as we saw, that, as we talked about at the beginning of this call, the trend towards more racism, more discrimination, more anti-Semitism that has come and surfaced to the top of the ugliness of discourse that has gone on. And I think as long as students feel that they have trusted adults in their lives who will fight for their right to be different and be proud and be accepted, and not just tolerated, because I think that tolerance is the wrong word. Be celebrated. Our differences should be celebrated. And as long as students feel safe coming to the adults in their communities. As many students have and parents have come to me when there are incidents, and there have been more and more incidents over the last several years than I can ever remember since I started in 2005. And as long as they feel like there is a partnership and a mutual respect between the people that they come to, the adults that they come to for help, and the school administrations that they are seeking to help move through this process, that partnership is very, very important.
Does anyone else have anything they want to say?
I'll add that school counselors play a critical role in making sure that students have a safe place to come to at any point in their day. We also have an advisory program at the high schools. And so that is another place where students get to form really tight-knit communities with a small group of other students, as well as an advisor. And so those relationships are critically important for students to feel safe and comfortable in speaking their truth, speaking their experiences. But I think the other piece of this is that we call it out when we see it, that there is no place for any of this in our community, and that not only students, but adults too, need to feel comfortable, need to feel that their voices will be heard, and that action will be taken to eradicate this, which is what the other panelists have talked about, because it's not anything that we will condone in our community. So I think part of it, and someone mentioned this before, is also making sure that we are being proactive in having these conversations. So this platform alone allows people to understand that this is a very important conversation that we're having in our community. It also says that we will not tolerate certain things, and that there's recourse for students, for staff who may experience racism or discrimination, because it's not something that is something that we condone in Norwalk Public Schools on any level.
You know, that safe place that you're looking for is different for everybody. As you grow and develop, you're going to realize there are people in your life that you can reach out to, feel comfortable, know that they're going to listen, know that they're there to help you. They come in all different locations, whether it's a school principal, a school teacher, the guidance counselor, whether it's a school resource officer who's in your school, parents, anybody that you've learned to feel comfortable with. And so I say there's no one answer for anybody. As I was growing up, I knew that I could go to my father or my mother with anything that bothered me. My older brother was a safe haven for me at times. So those are the things that you start to feel comfortable with as you interact on a daily basis with different people in your life. And so you'll start to feel comfortable, and you'll know instinctively who that person or that location is.
Thank you everyone for your answers and for speaking. Roy, would you like to ask another question?
Of course, thank you. All these policies and resources are really great to know, but on a more theoretical level, how do you effectively teach students and community members about how language can be hurtful and that jokes about certain things are not okay? What does anti-racism look like in our community and schools?
I think it takes courage. I think it takes courage on the part of adults as well, to call out other adults when they see or hear things that are discriminatory. We know that racism and discrimination and anti-Semitism begin in children in the home, and they're taught. And we need to make sure that we are living in a society where we do not tolerate even casual aggressions, microaggressions against people of different race, creeds, colors, religions. It's just not acceptable. And we need to have the courage to speak out and not be a bystander when we see this happening around us.
I appreciate your question of how you practical and then theory, because now you're talking my language, right? I love talking theory, but in particular, there's when you're thinking about sort of language use, I always think about there's a researcher named Daryl Wing Su, who's a psychologist at Columbia University, who studies and has been writing about this concept called microaggressions, right? So, which is basically the slights that individuals and that are part of groups that have in which they're experiencing derogatory language or undercuts that are expressed in ways that at times you're unsure of what is implied by it, right? So it's the idea of, I get often the sentiment of, gosh, you are so articulate, right? And at times it's conveyed in a way as if it's a surprise, right? As if it's not an anticipation of being able to articulate sort of something cogently, And so the idea of microaggressions, I think about it in relation to language, because I think there is ways in which we operate as a cultured society to use language that we have normalized, that has derogatory history to it, right? So that we have to be clear about that. It's important for us to unpack those things and replace those ideas, and in particular, replace them with the understanding that that those language usage have historically been problematic, right? So, another way in which I think about language is also symbols. Like I think about like some football teams that have like mascots that are images of indigenous populations, right? Where people will say, well, it's just a picture. I said, yeah, but it's feeding a stereotype that we carry about indigenous populations. That's language use that is derogatory, and being able to kind of push each other to recognize that it's no longer about romanticizing what we had that image about, but in really paying attention to the harm, the microaggressions that it's actually doing to populations that we need to get better around humanizing. So I think the work, the possibilities about doing that is that we've got to own that it is wrong, that is derogatory, that it's hurtful, and seek to, and I want to support what the rabbi was alluding to, is the idea of actually being cognizant of trying to humanize each other, right? In that we don't have to sort of use language that is sort of steeped in stereotypes about each other.
And that piece of humanizing is so critical. Like this past week, I've dealt with a few microaggressions, and I think you have to name it for people too. So when you are experiencing microaggressions that are leading to unproductive dialogue or distressful situations that don't solicit positive outcomes or conversations, it's really important to be brave and call it. Because if you don't name it, if you don't call it, then it becomes part of a normalized culture. So in thinking about the work that we have to do as a system, it's really important for me to, one, model the things that we're asking not only our leaders to do, but we want you as students to be able to do. When you talked about finding a safe place to talk about your experiences, or if someone expresses something that might not be acceptable for you because it's derogatory towards your race, your culture, your beliefs, even like food shaming, for instance, sometimes happens frequently, depending what country you come from and what your customs of eating are. Some people make, I had that experience once where somebody was making a comment about the food that my grandmother used to make, which to me came from a place of a lot of love and care. And the way that the person was expressing himself about this was extremely derogatory. But I feel like we have a responsibility to name these things for people, because a lot of times people do it without ill intent. It's more about like ignorance and not understanding or knowing. And if we don't build awareness, it just perpetuates the behavior. So for me, it's really important not only to name it, but also to take an opportunity to educate, because it's very different when somebody does it because they have other intentions or beliefs. But if somebody's doing it out of ignorance, we have a responsibility to educate.
And part of that education starts with doing things that are celebratory in the school building. So I'm in my 14th year with Norwalk Public Schools. And I want you, when you get off this call, please indulge me. I want you to look at your school calendar. This is the first year ever that we have had the LGBTQ Pride Day on our school calendar. And so when we're talking about embracing everyone and celebrating our differences, then that's one place that we can look. And so Dr. Estrella put that on the calendar. And there's some other things that are not typically found on school calendars. That's one really strong example that says from the top, from leadership, we are an inclusive community. We're not tolerating each other. We're celebrating our differences. And we're going to say that on our school calendar, these things are important to us as a community. In the building, it looks like me buying a pride flag for every single P-TECH classroom so that every student, every staff member, be that person LGBTQ identified or an ally, knows that we created and are a part of an inclusive and safe community. So those are the things that we can do to say, this is really who we are, in addition to the conversations that we're having.
Thank you for your answers. Melanie, would you like to ask our final question?
Thank you, yes. Our final question takes a more positive note. When we learn about other races and cultures, we want to know about more than the struggles and hardships. We want to know about the achievements and successes as well. How are you working to teach children, students, and other community members about the achievements and excellences of members of different cultures and races?
I'll start. So we've been talking a lot about our curricula and how do we enhance our curricula from not only the books and resources that we utilize, but also what do we emphasize and celebrate, right? A lot of times when we talk about particularly African American history, we start with slavery. Yet there's been years and decades and centuries of history that speak to kings, pharaohs, and a lot of achievement that not necessarily is ever spoken about in the context of the history that we teach. So part of our goal is to not only emphasize the realities of some of the most challenging times for people of color because of whatever was happening in history at that point in time, but also to celebrate the rich and amazing culture that exists within, but also highlighting the amazing achievements that have happened throughout history amongst people of color, whether they're Black, Hispanic, Asian, Indigenous, you name it. There's so many amazing things that have occurred that we don't take the time to highlight. So I think at a fundamental level is rethinking what we prioritize, and two, really getting to know who the people in front of us are and utilizing that information to then inform what we celebrate, how we celebrate, and how do then we enhance what we're doing. It might be that one school has students from a particular country or that celebrate a particular culture, then they need to take the opportunity to highlight and celebrate who those individuals are within the school. And it doesn't have to look the same in every single building, because every single building has its own richness and gifts associated with the people that are within it. So a lot of it is going to be about really knowing who the people in the community are and utilizing that to leverage the greatness that each member brings to the bigger picture of the school.
P-TECH is actually the only high school this year that is piloting, or next year, I'm sorry, piloting the state's African American and Latinx history course. And we're very much committed to doing that because, as we all, I'm sure, agree, Black History Month, Women's History Month, those kinds of things are one-offs. And we need to not only become more knowledgeable about and celebrate the richness that is a part of the history of Latinx peoples, as well as Black people in the United States and throughout the world. One way to do that is to say that that is part of our core curriculum. And we hope to continue to diversify the curriculum because there are so many other communities that need to be taught, we need to learn about, that we need to not just celebrate, but really have conversation about, what's happened throughout history. And we also need to teach a holistic history. We need to make sure that we're not just focusing on those things that people already know or people are comfortable talking about. I recently had a conversation with a colleague of mine whose child is in one of the elementary schools, not in our district, but had an experience because the younger child, one of his friends, didn't get the full context, didn't get the full story of slavery. And so basically said that Black people are supposed to obey white people. So if we're doing a good job, a really thorough job at talking about these experiences with children, impressionable young children, we're going to talk about a holistic history. And so that does go back to curricula. It does go back to training our teachers. And it also means that we're going to take advantage of every possible opportunity provided to us to diversify our experiences and the experiences for our students.
One of the things, oh, go ahead.
That's quite all right. I believe in 2020, Governor Lamont has now required that high schools provide the Black and Latino history type of background as a required type of curriculum involved in the curricula, which I think is wonderful, long overdue. But this is, and we are actually the first in the nation to require that. So kudos to Governor Lamont. Yes.
And just quickly, if you take two young children of any color, any background, and you put them together, they're going to play and have fun, and they don't see any difference. They're going to have, I tried an experiment one time when I was at the Carver, and I took two young kids and I brought them together. One was African-American and one was Caucasian. And they held hands, they walked around together, they were having fun. And I pointed that out. You learn you learn your biases. And it was mentioned earlier, usually it starts in the home. And sometimes it's very difficult to undo that. But we have to keep trying to undo that because when we have, as my wife just mentioned, the courses in the difference in the schools, when we celebrate Black History Month, when we celebrate the achievements of Latinos and African Americans and Asians, when we celebrate those things and we become more familiar with those things, that's when you start to develop a respect of each other's achievements. And we need to celebrate and honor what makes us alike, and also respect and honor and celebrate the things that make us different and unique.
Kudos to that, and I completely agree. I think it's an opportunity for us to celebrate difference as an asset, rather difference as a problem. One of the things, to your question around, how do we sort of make sure that we're all in our own little way reminding folks of the achievements and excellence that is within our diverse society. One of the things that I do in various meetings that I get to attend to, where I'm the driver of, I will, as an opening exercise, and depending on the time that I have, I'll do this, where if it's, let's say if it's Women's History Month, I'll have everyone introduce themselves and say, name one woman and their accomplishment that you really honor and cherish, right? You know, and it's fascinating to see that with, you know, and I work with adults who they struggle, right? And they struggle in terms of sort of realizing like, wow, what are examples of excellence that I have when I think about Women's History Month? When, you know, we just started Asian American Pacific Islander Month, right? So as the next meeting I'm going to have, I'm going to ask folks, hey, share an example of what lives in your sort of consciousness around the excellence and achievements that live within Asian American Pacific Islander communities. And, you know, and it's not in any shape or form to kind of shame adults, but rather to remind us of the work that we need to continue to do, right? That we're as adults, we are still in process, right? As kids, I'm sure you're seeing us as like, wow, they know so much more, and they've made great decisions, and they're set in their ways. You know, it's like we're still in evolution, and we're still needing to know a lot more. And I think providing opportunities for us to remind ourselves of what's the excellence and achievements of the range of diverse groups that exist in our society that we need to know more about is an important endeavor to do.
Thank you all for answering our questions. I would like to turn it back over to Mr. Kirby.
Great. Thank you very much, Melanie. And thank you to all of our panelists for answering all of our students' questions. I would just like to shine a spotlight on our 3 student moderators. They, with the help of our 8th grade Justice House GT class, created all the questions that you were asked tonight. I could see, especially a couple of them, yes, there was a lot of smiles from our moderators, like, this question's coming for us, I like it. So that was really awesome. So thank you all. Thank you 3 for doing an amazing job moderating tonight. I think this was your first time doing it on a panel. And you know, quite an easy panel to start with. You know, it's not often you get the mayor and superintendent on one call. Dr. Mazzone, would you like to add anything?
I would. What a proud moment for the Nathan Hale school community. A thank you to Dr. Estrella and Dr. Fergus for challenging Nathan Hale as a community, Nathan Hale teachers, Nathan Hale students, Nathan Hale administration, to start what I heard all of you mention, this theme of a courageous conversation, a proactive conversation, and an ongoing conversation. And this year for us and tonight for our whole school community, we got to share it with everyone in Norwalk, is really a moment where we're going to start something ongoing that will continue. So again, a heartfelt thank you to Mayor and Mrs. Rilling, Dr. Estrella, Ms. Amager, Rabbi Sklar, and Dr. Fergus. Thank you to our 3 student panelists. And this is a very proud moment and really engaging conversation. So thank you for joining us. Have a great night, everyone.